Have you ever stopped to think that a single image, blurry, dark, incomplete, could be enough to end an entire life? It was early morning in a neighborhood that had slept peacefully until then, when the nightmare began. Two hooded men invaded a pharmacy through the side door, armed and precise, as if they already knew exactly what to do. They coldly overpowered the attendant, searched the cashier, stole money and prescription drugs, and disappeared into the shadows of the night in less than 4 minutes. It all happened so quickly that it seemed like a blur in memory, and in a way, that was exactly it. The only security camera on the street, old and poorly positioned, captured just a single frame. One of the assailants, for a fraction of a second, took off his hood. But the image was a mix of shadow, pixelation, and distorted angle. A poorly defined, partially covered, unclear profile, but which, in the eyes of the system, would soon become the central piece to incriminate someone. This image, which barely showed a face, was about to be presented as absolute truth. And while the real criminals walked free, someone completely innocent was about to step into their shoes because of a mistake that started with the click of a camera. If this story has captured you this far, it's because you feel the weight of injustice, just like I do. So take advantage of this moment and click the like button. This helps give a voice to those who have been silenced. And if you want to follow more real, intense stories that the system would prefer to keep hidden, subscribe to the channel now. This is just beginning. That single image, almost a black and white blur, became the center of an entire investigation. That was all the police had. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no physical traces, just that frame extracted from a grainy video, where one of the criminals appears for less than a second with part of his face exposed. The resolution was terrible, distorted by shadows and street lighting. Even so, the image was treated as definitive evidence, not because it was conclusive, but because it was convenient. Unable to advance the investigation, the police decided to appeal to the population. They shared the image on social media and local news, asking anyone who recognized the suspect to get in touch. And that's when Jonas's fate began to be sealed. A neighbor, who barely knew him, but had had long-standing disagreements over parking space, anonymously called the police station. He just said, "I think it's Jonas. The head shape is the same." This sentence, without technical basis, without any visual confirmation, was enough for the police to put together a narrative. Jonas Ferreira, father of 2 children, worker, clean record, became the main suspect in a violent crime because of the shape of his head, and more serious than that, no one bothered to compare this complaint with a real analysis. No expert was called. No facial comparisons were made. A neighbor's word mixed with a blurry image created the perfect profile of a culprit. From that moment on, justice was no longer sought. Confirmation was sought. And the image, the one that didn't even show the entire face, would be used as the key to a cell that Jonas should never have known about. Because the truth is that often the system does not want to find who committed the crime. He wants someone to put behind bars. And when that happens, appearance becomes a sentence. With that empty complaint in hand and the blurred image as justification, the police didn't hesitate. In the middle of Saturday morning, they knocked on Jonas's door as if they were arresting a dangerous fugitive. He was still wearing pajamas, holding a cup of coffee, and his daughters were playing in the living room when the agent's screams interrupted everything. Without a warrant, without a clear explanation, they dragged him out of the house, handcuffed under the terrified eyes of his wife and children. A scene that no one in the family would be able to forget, not because of the physical violence, but because of the emotional brutality of seeing an honest man being treated like a criminal, based solely on supposition. In the district, the humiliation increased. Interrogated for hours, Jonas repeated a simple truth. He was working at the time of the crime. He presented proof of time recorded by biometrics, witnesses of his shift. But the investigators didn't even bother to Check. They didn't want to hear facts. They wanted to fit Jonas into the blurred image they held in their hands, as if it were a sketch of destiny. One of the agents even said coldly, "The image is clear. There's no point in denying it." But it wasn't. Nothing in that image was clear. Neither the face, nor the context, nor the exact moment of the crime. But once Jonas's name entered the system, the rest became a mere formality. The logic was reversed. He needed to prove that he was innocent, even when nothing actually linked him to the crime. And meanwhile, the media was already preparing headlines with his name printed next to the word suspect. From that moment on, Jonas was no longer a man. He was a caricature built by haste and fear, a number on a bulletin, a face behind bars, an easy target for a system that would rather make mistakes quickly than admit that it might be blind. When the investigation proceeded to technical analysis, the results were, to say the least, alarming. There were no Jonas fingerprints in the pharmacy, no DNA fragments, not a single strand of hair, drop of sweat or biological material placed him in that scene. The clothes seized from his house, treated as possible evidence, were completely different from those worn by the criminal in the footage. Even the physical type didn't match perfectly. But none of this was enough to stop the avalanche of assumptions. The prosecution, instead of backing down in the absence of concrete evidence, doubled down. They reinforced the narrative, built on a blurred image, expanded until it completely lost its definition. What should have been weak evidence was treated as absolute evidence. The silhouette is compatible, the shape of the face too, they said at the hearing. No experts were called to analyze the photo. No facial recognition technology was used, no forensics or detailed reconstruction. Just the blind conviction that the image was all they needed. The defense, without resources and without access to its own experts, found itself cornered. The arguments that there was nothing concrete, that all the physical evidence exonerated Jonas, were simply ignored. It was like shouting in a deaf courtroom where the urgency for someone to blame spoke louder than the truth. Jonas watched, stunned, as the weight of the judicial system rested on a blurry photograph and crushed his entire life with it. The question that hovered silently at the bottom of everything was the most frightening. How is it possible that an image without context, without clarity, without technical basis, has so much power over a person's destiny? And the worst was yet to come. When the trial began, there was no atmosphere of justice. It was as if everyone already knew the ending, and Jonas, there in the dock, was nothing more than an extra in a pre-written script. The prosecution arrived with the image enlarged on a poster, highlighted as if it were a revealing work of art. It was the same blurry, unclear image with shadows covering almost half of the face, but now in gigantic size, projected in front of the jury with the phrase hammered over and over again. "We have no doubt it's him." With each repetition, the real doubt, the one that should be debated, was being suffocated by a manufactured certainty. Jonas's lawyer, visibly distressed, tried to react. He requested specialized expertise, requested technical analysis of the image, talked about the total absence of physical evidence. But nothing he said seemed to matter. Without scientific support, without support from experts, his words sounded like noise in the face of the force of the theater set up by the public ministry. The judge, instead of acting cautiously given the fragility of the evidence, allowed the image to be treated as substantial evidence. "It's enough to convince the jury," he said. This wasn't a courtroom. It was a stage, and all eyes were on a man who had already been tried before the defense's first argument had even been heard. Public opinion, fueled by sensationalist headlines and hateful comments on social media, had already condemned Jonas with gusto. For many, he didn't need to prove innocence. He just needed to play the guilty role. And in the midst of it all, a life was being undone. Not by evidence, but by interpretations. Not for truth, but for narrative. The trial that was supposed to seek justice turned into a spectacle of empty convictions, where the absence of Evidence became irrelevant, and Jonas, in that crowded courtroom, understood sometimes justice doesn't need evidence, just a face to blame. If you've gotten this far and felt a lump in your throat, tell me something in the comments. Do you think a blurry image should be enough to destroy someone's life? Comment below. It's not proof if you believe that real justice needs more than supposition. Your comment could be the push this story needs to reach even more people and perhaps prevent another innocent person from being buried because of a mistake. The sentence fell like a cold hammer, read in a calm, almost bureaucratic tone, as if they weren't destroying a life in real time. Jonas listened to the verdict in silence, but inside the world was crumbling into pieces that he could never put back together. 18 years. 18. There was no evidence. There was no DNA. There were no fingerprints. There was only one image, distorted, dark, subjective, that was now the reason. He wouldn't see his daughters grow up. In the audience, his wife sobbed softly, defeated by a system that did not want to see the obvious. And the eldest daughter, just 6 years old, looked at him with big, confused eyes and asked in an innocent whisper that cut like a knife, "Why are they taking Daddy if he didn't do anything?" Jonas couldn't respond. No words would be able to explain that inside justice was just a formality, and the truth had been ignored. He left the court handcuffed, in front of the cameras, treated like a highly dangerous criminal. On the street, looks mixed between curiosity and condemnation. No chance to explain himself, no chance to breathe. Because at the end of the day, who needs proof when the narrative has already been sold and bought by society? For many, Jonas was already guilty from the moment his image was associated with that photo. And for the system, admitting a mistake is much more difficult than maintaining a lie. And it was like that, with his heart crushed and his soul torn apart, that he was thrown into the abyss of a condemnation based on absolutely nothing but appearance. The days turned into weeks, the weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years. Jonas sank into a silence that wasn't just that of the cell. It was that of the indifference of the world outside. He wrote letters every day, like someone throwing bottles into the sea of a system that pretends not to see. He begged for review, for listening, and for justice. But there was rarely a response. Public lawyers changed roles, promises disappeared into thin air, an NGO said, "Let's analyze the case." But none of them stayed long enough to see the truth in the midst of that process devoid of evidence. His wife stopped visiting. The children were prohibited from seeing him by order of their grandmother. Even the smell of childhood letters disappeared. The phone rarely rang. The cell became a mirror of an abandonment that went far beyond the concrete walls, because no one wanted to be associated with a man who, in society's eyes, was guilty, even when everything about him screamed innocence. It was like that for 9 years. 9 years in which Jonas wrote, crossed out, and rewrote every detail of the day of his arrest. He catalogued dates, memories, names of guards, speeches of judges, as if your only weapon was not to forget. Time seemed frozen, except for the pain that only grew. He saw other prisoners receiving visits, good news, parole, but for him there was no exit plan, just the echo of the phrase that doomed him. The picture is clear, and ironically, it was this image that overshadowed reality itself. Jonas lived like a shadow, and with each passing day, the system seemed more comfortable with the mistake it made and less willing to correct it, until, out of nowhere, an unexpected light began to shine through the bars. But at that moment, Jonas was still just the faded face of a mistake that no one wanted to see. It was on a random night, sitting among piles of forgotten files, that documentary filmmaker Caio Amaral came across Jonas's case. He had been steeped in stories of facial recognition-driven miscarriages of justice for months, but this was different. The fragility of the evidence, the absurdity of the narrative, and the silence surrounding the case caught his attention like a scream lost in the dark. How could someone be convicted based on a blurry image without any technical confirmation? Caio decided to go further. He located the original image of the security circuit, digitally archived in a public bank, and, with authorization from his research team, submitted the material to a state-of-the-art artificial intelligence program, the same one used by international agencies for biometric identification. The process was meticulous. The AI analyzed every visible facial point, jawline, distance between the eyes, curvature of the ears, angle of the nose. Then he cross-referenced this information with hundreds of real images of Jonas, old photos, documents, records, and what the machine revealed in seconds, the judicial system refused to see for almost a decade. The lines simply didn't match. The face captured in the pharmacy frame belonged to someone else. The difference was not minimal. It was screaming. Jonas was not, and had never been, the man in the image. Caio felt the weight of that discovery in his chest. It was like finding an open wound that no one was willing to treat. He took the report, printed graphics, organized the evidence, and rushed to present everything to an NGO that worked on criminal review cases. For the first time in 9 years, the truth didn't come from a desperate scream from inside a cell, but from data, technology, and real investigation. And it was clear as light. Jonas was trapped by a grotesque mistake, an error that now finally had a name, form, and proof to be unmasked. If you've made it this far, tell me one thing honestly. Do you believe that a blurred image, should it be enough to take almost a decade off someone's life? Right here in the comments, it wasn't him. If you also think that justice without proof is not justice, it is blind punishment. Your comment can help this story reach more people and prevent more innocent people from being forgotten by the system. The new skill was like a light being turned on in a room that was too dark for too long. The NGO, accustomed to dealing with judicial errors, was perplexed by the fragility of Jonas's case. They wasted no time. They called in the best forensic experts in facial recognition and image analysis. And when the reports started coming in, the truth didn't just come out, it screamed. Precise measurements showed irrefutable differences. The contour of the chin was more angled, the nose was wider, the eyes were closer together, features incompatible with Jonas's. The image that had doomed a man for nearly a decade was not him. It never was. Worse, when crossing the data, they discovered that the face in the image was that of a man already investigated for similar crimes, but who was never even named in the process. It was as if, out of convenience or haste, the system had chosen the closest face, completely ignoring accuracy. Jonas was not similar. Jonas was just approachable. And this revelation didn't just unmask error, it exposed a system that chose to hastily condemn rather than responsibly investigate. The battle for the review was intense, marked by resistance, institutional pride, and fear of admitting the error. The new legal team, based on technical reports, forensic studies, and artificial intelligence analyses, built an implacable dossier. There was no more room for doubt. It was impossible to deny that Jonas had been convicted on the basis of false identification. Even so, the prosecution tried to discredit the experts, claiming that the technology could fail. But this time, the scales of justice were already weighed down too much by the weight of the truth. The outcry from independent media, the involvement of NGOs and popular engagement demanding justice made it impossible to keep the case buried. The court had no choice. He reopened the case, exposed his own flaws, and after 9 long years of silence and oblivion, annulled the sentence. Jonas, finally, was innocent, at least on paper, because outside the records, freedom still carried scars that could not be undone. Jonas's freedom did not come with applause, nor headlines of reparation. It came cold, bureaucratic, accompanied by a signature and a "you can go." When he crossed the prison gates, there was no one waiting. No authority reached out. No reports covered his departure. The state just corrected the error in the system, as if deleting a comma in a document, as if that were enough to give back 9 years of life. When he returned to his old address, he found closed doors. The wife had moved away, without leaving a trace. His children, now grown up, looked at him as a stranger. They didn't know what to say. Neither does he. He was free, yes, but trapped in a reality that was no longer his. Everything he built was gone. Denied jobs, suspicious neighbors, crossed eyes in the places that used to welcome him. The stain of the accusation, although denied, remained glued to the skin, because for many, once convicted, always suspect. And that perhaps was the worst sentence. An image, just an image. Blurry, distorted, captured by an old camera in poor lighting. This is what the system chose to call proof. And based on it, Jonas lost 9 years of his own life. 9 years away from children, away from freedom, away from any chance of starting over. The truth, when it finally came to light, did not erase the traumas, did not restore bonds, did not heal the wounds, because justice, when it arrives late, is no longer justice. It is an apology that does not repair, a correction that does not reconstruct. The image that was supposed to serve as an investigative resource became a sentence. And even with technology proving that he was not the man in the photo, Jonas continued to be the reflection of an irreversible error. Now, in the face of all this, a doubt haunts like an echo. How many other lives are being erased in silence while the world watches, without seeing clearly? If you've made it this far, it's because you feel, like me, that stories like this can no longer be ignored. So, if you believe that real justice begins when we give a voice to those who have been silenced, leave a like now and subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is more than content. It's resistance. And if you think this story was strong, just wait until what comes next. The truth sometimes hides in the most unlikely places.